Hi, my name is John Hill, and I am facilitating this particular YouTube video, which is going to be about the history of rock and roll um, from the insider's point of view, because I made some of it as well as observed some of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the times when I made it, and you're going to hear some stuff that you wouldn't hear otherwise. And my background is that I was a producer at Columbia Records. And I'm also a songwriter. I've pretty much done everything that you can do in the music business. At one point, I was a player. I was a studio musician. Then I've been an arranger, and I was a producer, and ended up scoring movies as part of it. And I ended up teaching at UCLA and also American University and Duke University and Dartmouth College, I should say. I taught in their Ollie program. Um, anyway, I've produced records for several labels, and I have to remind myself what they are. It's Columbia and Epic and Cotillion, which is a branch of Atlantic, Amy and Bell, which became subsumed into Arista. 20th Century, which is a label back then. It is no longer, of course. And the person at 20th Century who bought my record was Dave Apple, who has subsequently became allied with Hank Medras and produced Tony Orlando and Dawn. That's another story. That's a story we're going to get to, and also ABC Paramount. Um, and that's also a label that used to exist, and it's more important than it seems because it actually included Dunhill, which was the label that the Mamas and Papas were on, and also Cheech and Chong, of all things. And some of the artists that I've written for, I'm also a songwriter. Forgot to mention that part. Some of the artists that have recorded my songs are the Staple Singers, the Tramps, Pacific Gas and Electric, where I co-wrote a hit, "Are You Ready?" which I co-wrote with the lead singer of the band, Charlie Allen. The Buckinghams and the Grassroots, and those two, my specialty was writing the last song that an artist would record before they sank into total obscurity. And I sort of helped them do that. Cher, who of course has not sunk into total obscurity, Bill Deal and the Rondells, Susan Christie, who I had the first hit with way back in the day, and who has since been rediscovered, and has two separate CDs available. One on Sundays, um, and another one on Columbia, which is available on iTunes, the individual things. Also, for those who are Australian, it only makes sense if you're Australian, the Hilltop Hoods, which had a big hit with a song that I co-wrote. Um, but as I say, unless you're in Australia, you will never have heard of these people. So anyway, we're going to talk about the history of rock and roll beginning at the dawn of the 20th century, which is really pretty much where it begins, um, and going through the 20th century into the dawn and the beginning of the 21st century, which is where it kind of runs out of steam and becomes no longer a mainstream uh, pop music. It was a the kind of music that we listened to through most of the 20th century, especially the second half of the 20th century. Um, in the same way that jazz was the mainstream music in the 20s and 30s, and to some extent in the 40s, and has since become a very much of a niche product. Um, that's not to say that there are not rock bands now. Of course, there are, but it's not quite the same thing as it was in the 70s and the 80s. Um, so next week we're going to talk about the blues, which was the basically the foundation of all early rock and some subsequent rock and some subsequent pop songs. Um, and we're going to analyze that a little bit because it's important to understand that. But of course, if you don't understand it, it's not going to really affect your understanding of this music. It'd be nice to do it, but if you can't do it, you can't do it. There's no big problem. And I will say also that if I were a real YouTuber, I would say, of course, that in order that you have to smash the like button and subscribe. But I'm not going to say that because it's not my thing to say that. And I'm going to show you. Right now. I am in a sort of virtual studio, courtesy of Zoom. But I am going to let's see. I'm going to end that for a minute, just for a minute. Okay. All right. Let's see what I can do to do that. All right. And I'm going to show you where I really am, um, because I believe in truthfulness at all times. This is where I really am, and what you see is there. See a keyboard, a microphone, and a couple Clios that I have on the keyboard, just to prove my authenticity and to prove that I'm not kidding. Um, let's see. I'm going to go back to the virtual studio again. Yeah. Okay. And I have another one. I have a more modern virtual studio, which I will use. So anyway, I hope you will join me next week when we talk about, or next video when we talk about the blues and the foundation of early rock and roll and some of the precursors of rock and roll that happened in the early 20th century that led us to where we are now. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it.